Too big. Just sit on it. The rich rancher whispered to the young giant widow, who was terrified of being touched again after her husband's cruelty. Too big. That's what every man had told Beatrice Halloway her entire life. A young giant widow standing 6'3", with shoulders broader than most ranch hands and a presence that made proper women whisper behind their fans. Her cruel husband, Silas Drummond, had spent 3 years beating her down, calling her freak and unnatural, using her like a work animal, until the day a marshal's bullet made her a widow at 24. Now 6 months later and desperate, she stood at the gates of the richest ranch in Wyoming Territory, her floral calico dress doing nothing to hide what she was. Too tall, too strong, too much woman for any man to want. But Nathaniel Cordell wasn't any man. The moment the wealthy rancher saw her, something ancient and protective roared to life in his chest. While his foreman sneered at the freak widow of an outlaw, Nate saw a woman who'd been taught to make herself small in a body that refused to disappear. He saw terror in eyes that should have held fire. He saw a soul that had been broken by cruel hands, and he had gentle ones. "You're not too big for my ranch, B," he'd told her that first day. "You're exactly what I need." 3 weeks later, he'd proven it with every patient word, every respectful distance, every moment he treated her like something precious instead of something shameful. And now, on this golden October afternoon, with the prairie stretching endless behind them, Nathaniel Cordell did something that should have been simple, but felt like revolution. He sat down on a hay bale and pulled the young giant widow onto his lap. Beatrice froze, her whole body going rigid with remembered terror. No man had ever held her like this, like she wasn't too heavy, too big, too much. Silas had only touched her with fists and fury. The September sun had beat down merciless on her that first day when she'd arrived at these gates with nothing but a worn carpetbag and hands that knew only hard labor and harder blows. Clayton Burke, the ranch foreman, had looked her up and down with unconcealed disgust, his hand resting on his gun belt like she was something dangerous that needed putting down. "The Cordell Ranch don't hire no freaks," Clayton had spat. "Especially not the widow of a cattle-rustling snake like Silas Drummond. You got nerve showing your face here, woman." She'd flinched, stepping back so automatically that she didn't even realize she'd done it until her back hit the fence post. 6 months since Silas died with a marshal's bullet in his chest, and still his ghost made her cower. Still his voice echoed in her skull. Unnatural. Freak. Too big to be a real woman. But then another voice had cut through the hatred, deep and steady as bedrock. "That's enough, Clayton." Nathaniel Cordell had approached on a beautiful bay mare, his Stetson shadowing a face that looked carved from the mountains themselves. He was tall, not as tall as her, but taller than most men, 6 feet at least, and when he dismounted, his movements held the kind of confidence that didn't need to prove itself with violence. "Mrs. Drummond, is it?" "Just Beatrice, sir. Or B." She couldn't meet his eyes. Silas had trained that out of her early. "I know my husband wronged folks. I know I got no right asking, but I can work harder than any man. I'm strong. I don't eat much. I can sleep in the barn." "You'll do no such thing." Something in his tone made her look up, despite every instinct screaming not to. His eyes were sage green, and they held something she didn't recognize. Later, she'd understand it was kindness. But in that moment, she only knew it terrified her, more than Clayton's hatred ever could. Kindness in men was usually just cruelty waiting for the right moment. "There's a line cabin about a mile south needs tending," Nate had said, his voice steady and sure. "Room and board, plus $30 a month if you can cook, clean, and help with the heavy work when we're branding or building." $30, more than Silas had ever let her see in their whole marriage. More than her father had gotten when he'd sold her to Silas like livestock just to be rid of the problem. I I don't understand, sir. Don't seem complicated to me. You need work. I need workers. Clayton here is about to apologize for his rudeness. Isn't that right, Clayton? The foreman's jaw had worked like he was chewing leather, but he'd managed a stiff nod. And Beatrice had felt something dangerous bloom in her chest, something that felt like hope, but tasted like fear. Now, 3 weeks later, that same feeling flooded her as Nate's arms circled her waist, not grabbing but holding. Not demanding but offering. The warmth of him seeped through her calico dress, and she could smell leather and pine and something else she couldn't name. His heartbeat thrummed steady against her back, and his voice was a low whisper against her ear. Too big? You're not, Bee. Just sit on it. On me. Let me hold you. Let me show you what gentleness feels like. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, but his hands weren't cruel. His grip wasn't punishing. And for the first time in her cursed life, Beatrice Holloway felt something more terrifying than her cruel husband's rage. She felt safe. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't too much. She felt like her size, her strength, her very presence wasn't a curse, but something this man actually wanted. The autumn wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying the scent of hay and horses and freedom. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. The ranch house stood white and proud against the endless Wyoming sky. And in Nate's arms, Beatrice felt her body slowly, impossibly, begin to relax. That's it, he murmured, and she could hear the smile in his voice. See, the world didn't end. I'm still here, you're still here, and nothing bad happened. A sound escaped her throat, half laugh, half sob. When was the last time she'd sat on something and not worried about breaking it? When was the last time a man had held her and she hadn't felt his resentment, his disgust, his need to make her pay for daring to exist? I don't know how to do this, she whispered, her voice breaking. Do what? Be held, be wanted. Be anything except afraid. Nate's arms tightened just slightly, and she felt his breath warm against her neck. Then we'll learn together, Bee. One moment at a time, one touch at a time, until being held feels more natural than being afraid. The days that followed moved like honey, slow, golden, sweet in a way that made Beatrice's chest ache with how unfamiliar it felt. She worked from sunup to sundown, hauling fence posts that made the ranch hands whistle in appreciation, breaking ice on water troughs with her bare hands, lifting feed sacks 2 at a time, while men half again her age struggled with one. And every evening, as the sun painted the Wyoming sky in shades of amber and rose, Nathaniel Cordell found her. Sometimes he brought her coffee, still hot from the ranch house kitchen. Sometimes he just sat with her while she mended harnesses, his presence steady and quiet as the mountains. And sometimes, more and more often now, he'd reach for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. But it wasn't natural for Beatrice. Every touch still made her flinch inside, even when her body stayed still. Every moment of gentleness felt like a trap waiting to spring. Silas had taught her well. Kindness was just the calm before the storm, the breath before the blow, the smile before the strike. On the 4th week, Nate took her to the north pasture where Thunder grazed, the massive black stallion that had become the talk of 3 counties. 16.5 hands of pure muscle and wild beauty, bred special for a man Nate's size who needed a horse that could carry him through harsh winters and long cattle drives. I want to teach you to ride him, Nate said, his hand warm and solid in hers as they walked through the tall grass. But I need you to trust me, Bee. Can you do that? The word no sat heavy on her tongue. Trust was what Silas had demanded before he'd tied her in the barn with horses that might kick her skull in. Trust was what her father had asked for before he'd sold her to a man who'd spent 3 years teaching her that her body was something to be ashamed of. But Nate wasn't Silas, and every day, in 100 small ways, he proved it. "I'll try," she whispered. Thunder watched them approach with intelligent dark eyes, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian in the afternoon sun. He was magnificent and terrifying, and Beatrice's breath caught in her throat when Nate led her right up to the fence. "See how calm he is?" Nate's voice was low, soothing. "He's not afraid of your size, Bea. He knows strength when he sees it, knows it's nothing to fear." She stared at the stallion, then at the man beside her who smelled like leather and safety and promises she didn't know how to believe. "Silas used to tie me with the horses," she heard herself say, the words scraping out like broken glass. "Said if I was going to be big as a mare, I ought to live with them. Said maybe they'd kick some sense into me." The silence that followed was so thick she could taste it. When she finally dared to look at Nate, his jaw was set hard as stone, his eyes blazing with something that looked like fury. But not at her, never at her. "That man," Nate said, his voice rough as creek gravel, "didn't deserve a single day of your life, and I'm sorry. Sorry that happened to you. Sorry you were taught to be afraid of something beautiful. But I'd like to show you different, if you'll let me." Before she could answer, he climbed over the fence with easy grace and whistled low. Thunder trotted over, massive hooves thundering against the earth, and Beatrice's heart stuttered with old terror. But Nate just stroked the stallion's neck, murmuring soft words she couldn't quite hear, and the horse settled under his touch like something wild, remembering it was also safe. "Come here, Bea." She couldn't move. Her legs had turned to stone, her lungs forgetting how to pull air. The memories crashed over her, rough rope biting her wrists, darkness thick with the smell of hay and horse sweat, and her own fear, hooves striking the ground inches from her face, while Silas laughed from the barn door. "Bea," Nate's voice cut through the nightmare. "Look at me, not the past, me." She forced her eyes to his, and there was nothing in his face except patience. Not irritation, not disgust, just steady, unshakable patience that said he'd wait all day if that's what she needed. One step, then another. Her hands shook as she climbed the fence, and when she stumbled, Nate was there to steady her, his touch light, releasing the moment she found her balance. Thunder snorted softly, and she froze. "Easy," Nate murmured, and she wasn't sure if he was talking to her or the horse. "He's just saying hello. Here, give me your hand." He guided her palm to Thunder's neck, and the warmth of the stallion's coat shocked her. She'd expected something cold, something violent. But the horse just stood there, solid and calm, while she touched him with trembling fingers. "That's it," Nate said, and the pride in his voice made something crack open in her chest. "You're doing beautiful, Bea." No one had ever called anything about her beautiful. "Now," Nate continued, moving to stand beside Thunder, "I'm going to show you how to mount. It might feel scary at first, being up that high, trusting something that powerful. But Thunder's good, and I'll be right here. I won't let you fall." He swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, and Beatrice's breath caught at how right he looked there, powerful and confident and completely at home. Then he held his hand down to her, and she understood what he was asking. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm too heavy. I'll hurt him. Bea." Nate's voice was firm but gentle. "Look at me. Really look." She did. "You see a man who'd lie to you? A man who'd put you on a horse that couldn't hold you just to watch you fail?" She wanted to say yes, because that's what men did. But looking at Nate's face, at the absolute certainty in his eyes, she couldn't make the words come. "Thunder was bred for this," Nate said. "Bred to carry weight, to hold steady, to be strong enough for people like us who don't fit the regular molds. And you know what the secret is? She shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. Being big isn't wrong, B. It's just different. And different isn't less. It's just different. He leaned down, his hand still extended. Now, are you gonna keep letting a dead man's lies run your life? Or are you gonna trust me? The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang. The sun felt warm on her shoulders. And Nathaniel Cordell's hand stayed steady, waiting for her to decide who she wanted to be. Beatrice took a breath that felt like the first one she'd ever really taken. Then she reached up and grabbed his hand. Nate's fingers closed around hers, strong and sure, and he pulled. For one terrifying moment she was airborne, the ground falling away beneath her, everything in her screaming that this was wrong, that she was too much, that something bad was about to happen. But then she was settling behind him in the saddle, her legs on either side of Thunder's broad back, and the horse didn't buckle, didn't stumble, just stood there, solid as the earth itself. See? Nate's voice rumbled through his chest into her body where she pressed against his back. Not too big, just right. And then he did something that stole whatever breath she had left. He clicked his tongue, and Thunder started to move. The world looked different from up here. That was Beatrice's first thought as Thunder moved beneath them with a rhythm that felt like breathing. Steady, powerful, inevitable. The prairie stretched out in every direction, golden grass rolling like waves under an endless sky, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like something that needed to hide. She felt like something that could see for miles. Nate's back was warm against her chest, and she could feel his heartbeat through his shirt, calm, unhurried, like being this close to her was the most natural thing in the world. Her arms circled his waist because there was nowhere else to put them, and she tried not to think about how right it felt, how her hands fit perfectly against his ribs, how his breath matched hers until they were breathing together. "You okay back there?" His voice carried on the wind, and she could hear the smile in it. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I feel like I'm gonna fall." "You won't. I've got you." 3 words, simple as stone. But they hit her chest like a physical thing, because Silas had never said them. Her father had never said them. No one in her entire life had ever promised to catch her. Thunder carried them across the north pasture and down toward the creek that cut through Cordell land like a silver scar. The cottonwoods grew thick here, their leaves turning gold with autumn's touch, and the sound of water over rocks was like music Beatrice had forgotten existed. Nate guided Thunder to a stop in the shade, then swung down from the saddle with easy grace. "Your turn," he said, reaching up to help her down. Panic fluttered in her throat like a trapped bird. Getting up had been one thing, gravity and Nate's strength pulling her. But getting down meant trusting that the ground would hold her, that she wouldn't crash and break and prove once again that she was too much for this world. "I'll catch you," Nate said, and his hands were already on her waist, steady and sure. "Just lean forward and slide. I promise, B, I'll catch you." She closed her eyes, said a prayer to a God she wasn't sure listened to women like her, and let herself fall. Nate's hands caught her like he'd promised, guiding her down until her feet touched earth. But he didn't let go right away, and she didn't step back. For a long moment they just stood there, her hands on his shoulders, his hands on her waist. Close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes and count the lines that years of sun and wind had carved around them. "See," he murmured. "Still here, still whole, still safe." The word safe cracked something open in her chest, and before she could stop it, a sob tore free. Then another. And then she was crying, really crying, for the first time since Silas died. Maybe for the first time since she'd married him. All the tears she'd swallowed down, all the fear she'd carried like stones in her pockets, all the shame of being born too big for a world that wanted women small and silent and easy to break. "Hey, hey," Nate said, and his voice was soft as creek water. "It's all right, B. Let it out. You're safe here." But that just made her cry harder, because safe wasn't something she knew how to be. Safe wasn't something the world had ever offered a woman her size. Safe was a lie that men told before they showed you the truth of their fists. Except Nate's hands weren't fists. They were gentle, rubbing slow circles on her back like she was something precious that might break if handled wrong. And his voice kept murmuring soft words. "I've got you. You're all right. I'm not going anywhere." Until the storm passed, and she was left shaking and empty and somehow lighter than she'd felt in years. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his chest, not quite ready to step back. "I don't know what—" "Don't you dare apologize." His voice was firm now, almost fierce. "You've earned every tear, B, and if you need to cry a river, I'll stand here and hold you through all of it." She pulled back then, needing to see his face, needing to know if he meant it. What she saw there stole her breath. Not pity, not disgust, but something that looked like tenderness mixed with fury. Like he was angry on her behalf at every person who'd ever made her feel small. "Why?" The words scraped out of her throat. "Why are you being so kind to me? What do you want?" It was the question she should have asked weeks ago. The question every smart woman asked when a man started acting decent. Because men always wanted something, labor or land or access to a woman's body that she'd never really owned anyway. Nate was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers like he was looking for something specific. Then he spoke, and his words changed everything. "5 years ago, my wife died giving birth to our son. They both died, her and the baby, and I wasn't there. I was out on a cattle drive, making money, building this empire, thinking I had all the time in the world." His voice went rough, and she saw old grief flicker across his face. She was small, delicate. Everyone said how perfect she was, how fragile and fine. And I loved her, B. I loved her so much it hurt. But loving her always felt like holding something that might shatter if I breathed wrong. He reached up, brushing a tear from Beatrice's cheek with his thumb. "When you walked through my gates 3 weeks ago, terrified and desperate and convinced you were too much for this world, I saw what I should have seen years ago. Strength isn't something to apologize for. Size isn't something to hide. And a woman who can stand on her own 2 feet and work from sunup to sundown and still find the courage to cry, that's not too much. That's everything." Beatrice's breath hitched. "You want me because I'm strong. I want you because you're you. Strong, yes, but also kind, hardworking, honest, and beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with fitting some fool notion of what women should be." He cupped her face in his hands, and his touch was so gentle it hurt. "I want you because when I look at you, I see a woman who survived hell and came out still capable of hope. And if you'll let me be, I'd like to spend the rest of my life showing you that being wanted doesn't have to hurt." The world went very still. Even the creek seemed to hush, waiting for her answer. Everything in her screamed that this was a trap, that men didn't say things like this and mean them, that she'd wake up tomorrow and find out it was all just another cruel joke. But Nate's hands were steady on her face. His eyes held nothing but truth. And somewhere deep in her chest, that dangerous thing called hope bloomed a little brighter. "I don't know how," she whispered. "I don't know how to be wanted without being afraid. Then we'll learn together, one day at a time, one touch at a time. And if you get scared, you tell me. If you need space, you take it. If you want to run, I'll let you go. But B." He leaned closer, and she could feel his breath warm on her lips. "I really hope you don't run." She should have. Every instinct she'd honed through years of survival screamed at her to run, to protect herself, to not let this man get any closer to the broken places inside her. But Thunder stood patient nearby, and the cottonwoods whispered overhead, and Nathaniel Cordell's eyes held promises that terrified her precisely because they felt true. So instead of running, Beatrice did the bravest thing she'd ever done. She kissed him. It was clumsy and desperate and tasted like salt from her tears. But Nate's lips were soft against hers, and his hands stayed gentle on her face, and when she pulled back gasping, he was smiling like she'd just given him something more precious than all his cattle and land combined. "Well," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "that's a start." And for the first time in her life, Beatrice laughed, really laughed, until the sound echoed across the prairie like something wild finally set free. But freedom, she'd learned soon enough, was something men like Clayton Burke and ghosts like Silas Drummond's outlaw gang weren't willing to let a woman like her keep. Because back at the ranch, trouble was already riding toward them on horses that knew how to find weakness and exploit it. And the question wasn't whether Beatrice was strong enough to survive what was coming. The question was whether she'd finally believe she was worth fighting for. The night Silas's gang came, the moon hung fat and silver over the Cordell Ranch, painting everything in shades of ghost and shadow. Beatrice was in the main house for the first time, sharing supper with Nate at his table like she belonged there, when the sound of hoofbeats shattered the quiet like broken glass. "Cordell!" The voice came from the darkness beyond the windows, rough and mean. "Send out the widow. She's got something belongs to us." Beatrice's blood turned to ice. She recognized that voice. Jake Hollister, Silas's partner in thieving, and worse. The man who'd promised at Silas's funeral that the widow would pay for every dollar her dead husband had cost them. Nate was already moving, grabbing his rifle from above the door. "Stay inside, B. Lock the door behind me." But through the window she could see them. 5 men on horseback, torches burning like hellfire in their hands. And at the front of the pack stood Clayton Burke, the foreman who'd called her a freak that first day. He'd betrayed them, sold them out for whatever Silas's gang had promised. "The land," Clayton shouted. "The widow inherited claim to the north pasture. That's our land, bought with our money before that snake Drummond died." "That land was stolen," Nate called back, stepping onto the porch with his rifle ready. "And it sure as hell doesn't belong to you." Jake Hollister laughed, and the sound was like bones breaking. "Then I guess we'll take it the hard way. And when we're done burning your ranch to ash, Cordell, maybe we'll see if that giant widow screams as loud as—" He never finished. Because Beatrice walked out onto that porch, and she wasn't cowering anymore. She'd spent 3 years being beaten down, 6 months being afraid, and 4 weeks learning what it felt like to be wanted instead of despised. And standing there with Nate's warmth at her back and the memory of his kiss still burning on her lips, something inside her finally understood the truth Nate had been trying to teach her all along. She wasn't too big. She was exactly the right size to protect what mattered. "You want me?" Her voice rang across the yard, clear and strong. "Come get me." Everything happened fast after that. Jake spurred his horse forward, but Thunder, beautiful, massive Thunder, was already charging from the north pasture where he'd been grazing, responding to some whistle from Nate that Beatrice hadn't heard. The stallion slammed into Jake's mount, sending the outlaw flying. Gunshots cracked the night, and Beatrice grabbed the iron skillet from inside the door and swung it like a weapon when one of the gang rushed the porch. The man went down hard. Another came. She swung again, and this time she felt her strength. The strength Silas had mocked, the strength she'd learned to be ashamed of, become the thing that saved them. Clayton tried to shoot Nate from behind, but Beatrice threw herself between them, her size and power knocking the foreman sideways as the bullet whistled past into darkness. You're too big, Clayton screamed, scrambling backward. Too big, too much, too... Exactly right, Beatrice said, and her fist connected with his jaw, the way she'd always wanted to connect with Silas's. When the marshal arrived 20 minutes later, drawn by the gunfire, he found 5 outlaws tied up in the yard, one betraying foreman nursing a broken jaw, and Beatrice Holloway standing on the porch with Nathaniel Cordell's arm around her waist. She was bloody and bruised and breathing hard, and she'd never felt more alive in her entire life. You saved us, Nate said later, after the marshal hauled away the gang and Clayton was arrested for conspiracy. They were sitting on that same porch under the stars, and his hand was warm in hers. Use that strength of yours to protect instead of being protected. You know what that makes you be? What? Free. The word settled into her chest like sunlight, and she realized he was right. Free from Silas's ghost, free from the shame of being big, free to be wanted and strong and safe all at once. Marry me, Nate said, and it wasn't a question so much as a promise. Be my wife, my partner, my equal. Be exactly who you are, as big and strong and magnificent as God made you, right here on this ranch for the rest of our lives. Beatrice looked at the man who'd taught her that gentleness wasn't weakness and that being held didn't have to hurt. She looked at the land that had become her home and the stars that stretched forever overhead, and she said the word that changed everything. Yes. 3 months later, when Beatrice Cordell, no longer a terrified widow, but a rancher's wife who could haul fence posts and gentle horses and kiss her husband until they both forgot their own names, rode thunder across the north pasture with the wind in her hair, she finally understood what Nate had meant that first day. She wasn't too big. She was exactly right. And being loved didn't have to hurt anymore. So tell me, did this story touch your heart the way it touched mine writing it? Drop a comment below and let me know what time it is, where you are, and what part of the world you're watching from. And if stories like this, stories about finding love after pain, about being exactly who you were meant to be, if these stories move you, hit that notification bell so you never miss another one. Because everyone deserves to hear that they're not too much. They're exactly right,